Broadcasting from New York City to the world, it's the G-Man Interviews.
And everything looks gray. The nurses, flowers, blood. I'm wandering the halls of the hospital. My ears are ringing. I take the elevator up to the roof. I climb the stairs. We're not supposed to be up there, but that's where the doctors take their smoke breaks. So the door was open. And the whole living thing just didn't, make sense anymore. I was out there for a while, standing on the edge, and it was cold, it was dark, and I felt calm.
Why didn't you jump?
The sun came up.
The sun came up?
Yes. The sun came up and I didn't feel like dying anymore.
Welcome. That was an excerpt from the critically acclaimed film The Messenger, starring Ben Foster and Woody Harrelson. Its central characters, Staff Sergeant Will Montgomery, played by Foster, and Captain Tony Stone, played by Harrelson, are casualty notification officers. U.S. Army representatives charged with the task of informing relatives that a loved one has been killed in the field of battle. Staff Sergeant Montgomery was declared a war hero after serving in Iraq, but he secretly wages an intense battle to overcome PTSD, suicidal thoughts, and the ravages of war. The Messenger helps shed light on what has become a very alarming, disturbing, and increasing problem for the United States military. That problem is military suicides. In 2012, active duty suicides hit a record high, outnumbering combat deaths. And veteran suicides were recently numbered at 22 a day, or 1 every 65 minutes. According to various sources, including the Department of Veterans Affairs and the Associated Press, there were a total of 349 active duty suicides, while the number of combat deaths in Afghanistan totaled 295. KATHERINE MOSTKOFF, licensed clinical social worker and suicide prevention coordinator with the Department of Veterans Affairs, in association with New York Harbor Healthcare System, joins us to discuss how the department is addressing the problem and assisting distressed service members and their loved ones. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today to talk about this really important subject.
When I contacted your office to invite you on the show, you mentioned something that I think will come as a surprise to many in the country regarding combat and military suicides. You said many of the suicide cases involve people that didn't engage in combat. Please explain.
It's true. Actually, among veterans, only about half of the people who have killed themselves have been combat veterans. I'd say part of that is that the stresses in the military are very high, and I don't have a good explanation for it. It's just those are the numbers.
If the suicides were the result of personal or psychological issues the service members may have been dealing with and never revealed, what is the department doing to get a better psychological profile or understanding of those who serve or have served?
Well, there is certainly a lot of research going on about the causes for suicide. Really, there's a big multi-million-dollar study going on about active duty military and psychological profile to try to understand who joins the military, what kinds of stresses they experience, what kinds of issues put them at most risk.
Clearly, many who took their lives may have suffered in silence. Don't ask, don't tell, which could be argued force many others to suffer in silence, has had and continues to have a significant impact on military culture and lifestyle. Numerous news reports have revealed more and more gay teens and young adults have committed suicide as a result of bullying and non-acceptance. Has the department looked into whether or not there's a link between the controversial policy and military suicides?
Not that I'm aware of. I certainly can tell you that we do know that gay youth are at particularly high risk for suicide. And I think that in the military, that culture of don't ask, don't tell certainly, as you said, did make it so that many active duty and veterans did suffer in silence. And I think that that's actually leads to one of the most important things that I'd like to talk about today, which is that it's the most important thing is to ask people, to notice what's happening and to ask people. One of the biggest myths about suicide is that if you're worried about somebody and you ask them if they're having thoughts of harming themselves, that will increase the risk. In fact, quite the contrary. Asking is the most important thing to do because it opens up a conversation with the veteran. It opens up a conversation that allows the veteran to really talk about how they're feeling and to start to think about ways to get help, including, for instance, so you might say, why don't you call the Veterans Crisis Line? That's a good place to start. So when a veteran calls the crisis line, there is a responder who immediately, Jen, just to say, the Veterans Crisis Line operates every day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and veterans there are provided with free confidential support. So when the veteran calls the crisis line, he or she will talk to a responder who will help them through the immediate crisis. And if necessary, they will call emergency services and get them brought to a hospital if the crisis is that bad. In fact, since 2007, when the crisis line began, there have been over 30,000 of these rescues. More often, there are actually about 1,000 calls to the crisis line a day, and more often, the veteran speaks to the responder who gets them through an immediate crisis and then refers them to what we call the suicide prevention coordinator at their local VA. So when I get the call, I will talk with the veteran. I will invite them. Usually what I will try to do is invite them into the VA and can connect them with whatever resources they need, whether it's mental health resources or housing or employment services.
What are some of the indicators that servicemen and women need to seek immediate help?
The most important thing is if anybody is saying that reporting that they're having thoughts of suicide, if they're looking for if you notice that they're looking for ways to hurt themselves, if they're talking about death or dying or suicide. Some of the risk factors, of course, some of the warning signs are hopelessness, feeling trapped, increasing alcohol or drug use, withdrawing from friends or family or the activities of daily living. Sometimes I know people tell me that they just stop leaving their houses, they stop going to work, sometimes they'll stop going out to the store to buy food. So those are some of the main warning signs that a person is maybe feeling suicidal. I'd like to tell you about a veteran who came to us. He's a Vietnam veteran, and when he came back to New York after his military experience, his deployment to Vietnam, he came back to New York, and he remembers being spit on when he got to New York. And I think because of that, he tried to just put everything about his military experience in the background. He never came to the VA. He just tried to move on with his life, which is what many veterans do. But later on in life, in his 60s, he lost his job, he became homeless, and one day he found himself standing on the subway tracks thinking about jumping in front of the train. Fortunately, he somehow remembered about the Veterans Crisis Line, and he called the number. And the crisis line staff helped him to think about going to the VA for help. And he did that. So he came in to meet with me, and we worked together for quite a while. One of the things that I did with him was I introduced him to another Vietnam veteran who had had a very similar experience. And he got into mental health treatment. He was helped with housing. The last time I saw him, he told me that he had gotten an apartment, he'd gotten a job now, he was feeling really good. And he went on to say, "You saved my life. You were there for me on the very worst day of my life, and I can't thank you enough. Things are so much better for me now."
If a veteran decides to get help, but they're extremely reluctant to take medication, are there other treatment options available?
Yes, certainly. That happens quite a lot. I speak to many veterans who say that they're just not interested in medication. And in fact, we do have help that's available that doesn't involve medication. And sometimes it's really just a process. Sometimes people have ideas about medication that the medications may be addictive, when in fact the medications for depression, for anxiety, many of the medications for anxiety or for post-traumatic stress disorder are in fact not addictive medications. But it's important to remember that taking medication is voluntary. It's not something that the psychiatrist will absolutely require the patient to take. It's the veteran's choice.
Finally, what would you say to deeply distressed veterans that might watch this episode and proclaim, and I'm speaking as a veteran now, "It's too late. I can't deal with this hell anymore. No one gives a damn, and no one can help me. No one."
You know, I hear that quite often, actually. And what I would say is it's never too late. That, in fact, there is help. What I've seen is that people who have suicidal thoughts generally don't have those thoughts all the time. They really are desperate for help. And I really do believe that we can provide that help through the Veterans Crisis Line, through coming into the VA, through just coming in to talk. I find often that when I meet with a veteran, they're talking about their experiences for the first time, and just being able to talk about it, just having somebody to listen can really help very much.
Thank you very much for sharing your insight and time, Ms. Mostkoff.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity. And I just really want to say that every suicide is a tragedy, and we really do believe that we can help, that there is help for veterans. And I urge any veteran who's having these thoughts to call our crisis line. The Veterans Crisis Line number is 1-800 273-8255. And press 1 and you will talk with somebody who only speaks with veterans. There's also confidential chat at the veteranscrisisline.net. So thank you very much for giving me this chance to talk about this issue today.
My pleasure. The G-Man Interviews is grateful for the opportunity to have partnered with the Department of Veterans Affairs, KATHERINE MOSTKOFF, and the New York Harbor Healthcare System in effort to help distressed men and women of the United States Armed Forces. I'm going to close this special edition of the show with an outreach video that was provided by the Department of Veterans Affairs. I urge you to watch and share it with a loved one, friend, or colleague who served and may be waging a secret battle with depression, non-acceptance, or PTSD. I'm the G-Man, and until next time, stay cool, stay safe, and stay informed.
Talking to veterans about the real issues they're dealing with can be awkward and uncomfortable. We think to ourselves, I never served. How could I understand? They'll talk about it when they're ready. And then we wonder why they don't want to talk. But when their behavior changes, when they withdraw to themselves, increase substance use, or even talk about hurting themselves, it's time to act. Because if we don't, our families and relationships will suffer. Ask the hard questions. Listen to the veterans in your life and show you care. Make the call. It matters. When you recognize a veteran is in crisis, call the Veterans Crisis Line at 1-800-273-8255 and press 1.